Hello, welcome to another video podcast on neuroanatomy. In this video, we'll be talking about an area of the brain which is known as the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is an extensive area that lies anterior to the precentral area. So let's just try to mark out the boundaries of that area. As a first step, let's start with orientating the prosection. So what you can see over here is the left lateral view of the cerebral cortex. You can see the frontal lobe here and the occipital lobe at the back. And we can see the medial view of the left cerebral hemisphere over here, the frontal end being over here, and the occipital lobe and, or the back end of the brain being over here. Right, so now the prefrontal cortex is quite extensive. It includes the greater parts of the superior, middle, and the inferior frontal gyri. So most of the superior, middle, inferior frontal gyri would be falling within the domain of the prefrontal cortex. Then the orbital gyri, which can be better seen if you look at the brain from its inferior view, but those are partly visible over here, and those orbital gyri are going to be part of the prefrontal cortex as well. Then if you look at the medial side over here, most of the frontal gyrus on the medial side, so the medial frontal gyrus, that would be part of the prefrontal cortex. Then we can see another C-shaped gyrus over here, which is clasping the corpus callosum. This C-shaped gyrus is known as corpus callosum, and the anterior part of the C-shaped gyrus is called cingulate gyrus, and the anterior part of that cingulate gyrus is part of the prefrontal cortex as well. So, to summarize, the prefrontal cortex includes the major anterior part of the superior, middle, and inferior frontal gyri, the orbital gyri, the medial frontal gyrus, and then the anterior part of the cingulate gyrus. This region is also known as the Brodmann areas 9, 10, 11, and 12. So these areas basically encompass the prefrontal cortex. Now, large numbers of afferent and efferent pathways, they connect the prefrontal area with other areas of the cerebral cortex and with regions such as the thalamus, hypothalamus, corpus striatum. So it's extensively connected with other parts of the brain. The frontopontine fibers, which extend down from the frontal cortex to the pons, they connect the prefrontal cortex through the pontine nuclei with the cerebellum. So you can well see that how extensively this area is connected with other parts of the brain. The commissural fibers of the corpus callosum, which can be seen over here, the commissural fibers. So what we mean by commissural fibers are the white. These are the white matter fibers which connect the left and the right sides of the brain. So they run in a transverse plane. The corpus callosum is an example of a commissural fiber, and the anterior commissural fibers in the corpus callosum, they connect the prefrontal cortices on either side with each other. So the right and left prefrontal cortices are connected with each other through the commissural fibers running inside the genu of the corpus callosum. Now, the prefrontal cortex is concerned with the makeup of an individual's personality. It's a higher order association area. As a result of the input from many cortical and subcortical sources, this area plays a role as a regulator of the person's depth of feelings. It also exerts its influence in determining the initiative and judgment of an individual. So it's more concerned with the abstract functionalities of our personality. It's now generally agreed that the destruction of the prefrontal cortex doesn't really produce any marked loss of intelligence. It's basically an area of the cortex which is capable of associating experiences which are necessary for the production of abstract ideas, making judgments associated with emotional feeling and the personality makeup of an individual. So therefore, any tumor or any traumatic destruction, any lesion of the prefrontal cortex results in the person's losing initiative and judgment. Emotional changes that occur include a tendency to euphoria. The patient is no longer able to conform to the accepted mode of social behavior, and becomes kind of socially disinhibited and becomes careless of his, let's say, dress and his appearance. So lot of social disinhibition sets in as a result of the damage to this region. One thing which is kind of noteworthy is that the prefrontal cortex has a rich dopaminergic innervation. So, a failure of this innervation may be responsible for some of the symptoms of schizophrenia to set in, which include important disorders of thought and psychosis and all those things.